Hello and shalom, everybody. My name is Julia Jassy, and you are listening to Nice Jewish Girls, brought to you by Unpacked, a division of Open Door Media. On today's episode, we are talking with sports entertainer and founder of Girl at the Game, Gabrielle Starr. I am honestly so excited to have Gabrielle on the show today. I grew up a lot like her. I come from a family of massive, unabashed sports fans. Some of my earliest memories are from Kauffman Stadium and the old Yankee Stadium. Gabrielle found that the sports entertainment industry, like so many other industries, was not only male-dominated, but super exclusionary to women. So she decided to do something about that. She created Girl at the Game, a platform where sports are written by women for everyone. In our conversation today, I want to ask Gabrielle about her experience in the sports industry. What inspired her to create her own platform? Why did she feel this was so necessary? How has having access to a platform for the female voice to shine changed her relationship with sports entertainment? I am so excited for you guys to meet her. Let's do this thing. Gabrielle Starr is a full-time sports editor and content creator who grew up in Boston and Israel. A lifelong Red Sox fan, she founded Girl at the Game, the sports blog by women for everyone, and later launched the Girl at the Game podcast, which she hosts and produces. Before building a career in sports, Gabrielle taught Hebrew and Torah to 2nd, 4th, and 6th graders in Los Angeles. The daughter of a rabbi and a lawyer, she loves to debate and argue on all things Judaism and sports, especially when the two intertwine. Gabrielle, it's such an honor to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia. I'm so excited.
So am I. Let's get right into it. So can you tell me a little bit about where you're from, what your background was like growing up as a Jewish woman?
Yeah, so I was born on Long Island and we moved to Boston when I was 1. So really Boston's been my home. We also lived in Israel when I was in junior high and spent a lot of time in Israel. I did 2 semesters abroad in Israel, 1 in high school and 1 in college. I've lived back in New York for college. I lived in Los Angeles for 2 years. And, but Boston's really my home. I grew up right down the street from Fenway Park. My dad is a rabbi. So in addition to going to Jewish private schools from pre-K through 12th grade, I also went to synagogue every Saturday for Shabbat, pretty much until I got to high school when I decided I was too tired to go, and I was having tefillah every day in school. I speak fluent Hebrew. I taught my mom how to read Torah for my bat mitzvah. I taught kids in Los Angeles. My Judaism is very important to me. I'm not as observant as I was growing up. My parents are traditional, so they keep Shabbat, no electronics, no lights, no driving, no TV. We live within walking distance of our shul. They're both very proud Zionists, and my sister's actually living in Israel now, as is my dad's sister who made Aliyah 15 years ago. So Judaism and Israel is very important to me and my family, but for me, it's more about a sense of cultural pride and speaking out against anti-Semitism than it is about actually going to synagogue. There have definitely been times where I felt super connected to my Judaism in that way, like at my summer camp for Shabbat services. But currently it's more about things like finding my own place in Judaism, what it means to me as a young person in the 21st century.
How did that shift happen from growing up in a super observant household and going to a super Jewish high school to now that identity with Judaism being something that's shifted over time?
Well, so the interesting thing about where I went to high school, which is Gain Academy in Waltham, Massachusetts, is it calls itself a pluralistic high school. But really, the majority of kids were far less religious than my family. And the same thing goes for Salman Schechter. I went through K through 8. The school itself would have, tefillah every single day. Kids would learn how to read Torah. You had b'nai mitzvahs that you were doing, and there were celebrations at the school, and especially at Schechter growing up, you would get your first Siddur in 1st grade, you would get your first Tanakh in 2nd grade, all that kind of stuff. But for GAN and for Schechter, really, I was always one of the most, if not the most, religiously observant at home. A lot of kids that I grew up with, their parents sent them to those schools to give them something that they weren't getting at home. Whereas I was already having a lot of that at home myself. It also meant, fortunately for me, that I was doing really well in all my judaics classes because I got so much of that at home. Like, I don't think anyone else was hearing the stories that I was hearing. Like, at bedtime, I would be getting the story of, like, I would hear about, like, Bar Kokhba and stuff, and I don't think anybody else was getting that. You know, hearing about, like, Theodore Herzl, that kind of stuff. So
that's a really awesome experience.
like half of the passwords for, like, like, our Wi-Fi password, I think, is, like, Herzl 1897 or something. So if you come to Brookline, Massachusetts, you can hack into our Wi-Fi.
Oh my gosh. I'll keep that in mind.
I mean, literally right behind me, I have a Shai Agnon, Nations of Great Figures. My dad collects these little like these little figurines of just, like, famous Zionists. And I'm pretty sure he has all of them. And it's, like, Herzl and Jabotinsky and Ben Gurion. And they're just, like, in a row on a shelf in our apartment. So Judaism and Zionism is, like, very, very, very much a huge part of my life. But growing up, it actually was kind of hard for me because a lot of my friends didn't live in Brookline. They lived in the next town over, which was too far to walk. And I was the only kid that didn't drive. So if my friends couldn't get a ride to my house, like, I didn't get to hang out with my friends. And there was definitely a little bit of a resentment there when I was a kid, because it felt like in certain ways Shabbat was actually restrictive for me, as opposed to being a restful relaxation time that, like, you do things that bring you joy, which I believe is what Shabbat should be. I was often feeling resentful of, like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. You know, kids at Jewish schools are so busy throughout the week because you're doing twice as many curriculum. And on the weekends, like, I wanted to hang out with my friends. I wanted to do, you know, certain things. I wanted to watch things on TV on Friday nights. Like, Disney Channel always had, like, the Disney Channel movies, for example, would premiere on Friday nights. Couldn't watch them because it's Shabbat. So when I was a kid, there was definitely a little bit of, like, frustration there. But growing up, I, like, as an adult now, I look back and I feel so grateful that my parents raised me that way, especially because, for one thing, no TV on Shabbat meant I was reading all the time. I had an insane vocabulary. It definitely helped me as a writer. And, like, as a result, I totally was ahead of kind of the curve of just, like, having the stamina of reading. You know, I would read, like, 6 Nancy Drew books in, like, a day after shul on Saturdays as, like, a 10-year-old kid. You know, I would blaze through the Harry Potter books. I would, you know, and that was great for me. The same thing with, you know, all of the Hebrew, like, the Israeli songs that we were listening to in the house. Like, we'd have Hadag Nachash on the surround system while my dad was cooking dinner. And all of that helped me with my Hebrew. So looking back on it now, I treasure it a lot for both those reasons, but also just the amount of time I spent with my family, because we were all home together for 25 hours, not doing anything else.
And the point that you brought up about how having that time totally focused has led you to creating more writing skills and having that translate over to your career. So you've had this really cool kind of dualistic experience growing up in this way that was very connected to Judaism, and now kind of going in a different direction where you're really involved with sports. So right off the bat, no sports pun intended. Can you tell us about Girl at the Game and what that is?
Sure. So I founded Girl at the Game as, like, a hobby in 2017. I really wanted a place where I could put my opinions on sports and write about the things that I cared about. And there wasn't really a place that I saw that just would, like, let people write about things that they were passionate about. I wasn't looking to get paid. Like, I wasn't looking to do anything with it. It just was something where I had all these feelings. I wanted to put them out. At the time, I was working at a tech startup and getting ready to begin my first year of teaching. And I was freelancing as a beauty and fashion writer because I love makeup and skincare and fashion and all that kind of stuff. And I always have. And I'm always that person that friends go to being like, I need a new moisturizer. I need to do this. Like, literally last weekend, my best friend since I was 8 years old, she and I went to a SoulCycle class for the first time, like, basically since before the pandemic. And her mom texted her and was like, I know you're with Gabrielle. Can you please go to Sephora and get me, like, this, and this? I need a bunch of skincare. And she knows.
That's so funny.
But there was nowhere for me to write about baseball. And I grew up down the street from Fenway. My dad is a huge sports fan. His dad and great and uncle, who is 103 years old, grew up in Boston and, like, would go see, like, Babe Ruth play at the end of his career and, like, was a baby when the Red Sox won the 1918 World Series and didn't think he'd see one his entire life, and saw one when he was 86 years old. So there's like a ton of sports in my family, as well as Judaism. I would definitely think those are the two biggest kind of influences in my life. And whenever I can write about Jewish things on Girl at the Game, that's my favorite thing. Like, I've written about Koufax. I've written about Hank Greenberg not playing on the Chagim. I love, like, one of my really good friends is this guy, Ty Kelly, who played for the Mets and the Phillies, and he was on Team Israel Baseball this year, and is doing all this amazing work to help minor leaguers unionize. And he's a proud Jewish baseball player. So Girl at the Game for me was really just kind of like something I was doing for fun. And very quickly people started responding to it, and it started growing. I haven't looked in a long time. Last time I looked, I had like 30,000 subscribers to the website. We have the podcast as well. A huge Twitter following, both on my personal and the Girl at the Game accounts. And we've had some amazing guests, including Jewish guests, Ryan Lavarnway, who is a former Red Sox catcher, and currently he was just with the Marlins, and now I think he's playing independent ball. Ryan's a Jewish MLB player, and he was on the show, and that was so cool for me. Got to talk to him about stuff like that. And it just became something else, and it helped me really. That and the combination, Julia, I'm sure you can relate, of being horribly online all the time.
Unfortunately, yes.
Right? So those two things together really helped me build a career in sports in a non-traditional way, which is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from New York, so definitely similar experience, not with the Red Sox, more unfortunately for the context of the conversation with the Yankees. Not to create some inter-podcast rivalry, though.
It's okay. I'm originally from New York, but I think I would have been a Mets fan.
That's very understandable. No, my family... Because
I like pain, you know? I want to be miserable.
So it's really interesting that you kind of tell me the story. My dad was born in Kansas City. His dad was in medical school in KC. They were from New York. They were Dodger fans before the Dodgers moved. And my dad's father became a really huge Royals fan. And then he passed away before I was born, so I never got to meet him. And so many stories of learning about my grandfather were from my dad watching Royals games with us, or taking us to Royals games and learning about that. So for my mom, have the Yankees influence. For my dad, have the Royals influence. And it's really interesting the way that you describe this, because I feel like I've had a very similar experience growing up in a very sports-centric family.
My dad did the same thing. His father passed away when he was 15 years old. So I never got to meet him either. But a lot of the stories that he would tell me growing up were like, you know, Grandpa and I did this, Grandpa and I did this. One of them was that he, like, for people who are listening and don't follow baseball games used to primarily be played in the daytime, because before the big fancy light towers that you see now, you couldn't play baseball in the dark. And so, like, postseason games, like World Series games, were played in the daytime. And so my dad told me the story of his dad letting him skip school to go to a World Series game, a Red Sox World Series game. And it was the only multi-homer game of Carl Yastrzemski's career. And 2 years ago, this September, like basically 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, the Giants were in town to play the Red Sox, which like never happens because they're in the National League and they're all the way on the other side of the country. And Mike Yastrzemski is on the Giants now, Carl Yastrzemski's grandson. Carl Yastrzemski was the captain of the Red Sox. He played for them his entire career. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the greatest players of all time. And he's like 80 years old. And his son, Mike's dad, died. But Mike is now a Major League Baseball player. And he, like everyone in Massachusetts, like Yastrzemski is like a word. If you can spell Yastrzemski, you're a real Massachusetts person. And I got tickets and on-field passes to take my dad because Carl Yastrzemski was going to be there to see his grandson make his Fenway Park debut. And my dad and I went, and Mike Yastrzemski hit a home run at Fenway. And it was like the most amazing thing ever, because I was at a game with my dad at the same ballpark that he went to with his dad to go see a World Series game. And we're literally watching the grandson of the guy that they watched hit a home run in the World Series. And he's there watching his grandson hit this home run. And it was like the most incredible thing. And those are the kinds of things that made me fall in love with sports. Because it's like about family. It's about like the word Masorah applies just as much to Judaism, to baseball, as it does to Judaism. Like baseball, more than any other sport, I think, is a sport about tradition. It's passed down from fathers to children. And my dad raised me on baseball just as much as he raised me on Judaism. Like he raised me, like my dad, when he was really missing me when I was living in LA, would just mail me baseball books. Like I would come home and there would just be a box on my doorstep one time with like 10 books in it, and I could not lift it. And I just had to kind of tilt it into my threshold.
Yeah.
He would just mail me baseball books. And that idea to me of tradition and, you know, sharing things with the people you love is the most important part of everything in my life. Judaism, baseball, anything is about sharing it because it's connection. And that was a really long answer. I'm sorry, but
no, it was
that Mike Ostrowski game was like one of the best nights of my entire life. And the Red Sox lost. So like the fact that I'm even saying that shows you how serious I am.
It's really funny that you talk about this because I think this is something that I can really relate to, especially in my relationship with my father. I grew up going to a conservative synagogue on Long Island, and so I'd often go with my dad, and I'd sit next to him. And again, my grandfather died before I was born, and never got to meet him. And my dad, if you ever met him, he's a very loud guy. So
Mine
he'd be
too.
Yeah, he's Jewish, so he'd be praying so loud, and I'd be like, Dad, like you're being so loud. You gotta quiet down. And he'd tell me, he's like, I said the same thing to my father when I was growing up. And he always told me, well, heaven's a long way away. How is God supposed to hear me? I have to pray loud so you can hear me over everyone else. And so like all those little stories about my grandfather that I get either from sports with my dad or from going to synagogue with my dad were things that I wouldn't hear either, like anywhere else. So it's really interesting. Maybe it's because both of our dads are from New York, but just kind of that experience of, or I don't know if your dad's from New York, but you say you're born on Long Island. Just that similar experience of like Judaism and sports being the two most important things in the entire world.
My dad, so we live on the end of this cute street in Boston. And when I was a kid, we would like walk home from shul on Saturdays for lunch. And a lot of the times we would walk home with friends who lived in the area who went to our shul. And so my dad would kind of linger back and walk slower and talk with them. Or if I was staying home from shul, you could hear my dad coming up the street at the beginning of the street from one of the main streets in the city because he'd be talking to people.
That's so
But
funny.
there was this one night at Fenway, somebody I knew actually a little bit was pitching for the Red Sox. And he like could not find the strike zone at all. Which for people who don't know what that means, basically means like he's not executing his pitch as well, where a guy can either swing or strike out. And my dad, we're like sitting pretty close to the field. We were sitting in these really nice seats. And my dad is shouting, "Throw strikes!" like really loudly. And so then later at night, I hit up this player just to be like, yo, did you hear somebody in like the 8th inning screaming "throw strikes" at you? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, that was my dad. Sorry. Like I have to remind him that he like is like has this booming, like, I mean, he has a lovely voice. And when he sings like on like for the like Hagim and stuff at show, like I always thought he had such a gorgeous singing voice, but he has a booming baritone voice. And I'm like, Daddy, people can hear you. The players can hear you. It's late in the game, and they're not doing well this season. Like, there's not a lot of people here. Like, it's a loud, echoey ballpark.
That's really, really funny. So you've taken all of these experiences that you had growing up, sometimes with Judaism, but mostly with sports, and you've created your own platform for women with similar experiences, which, I mean, you and I didn't plan to have similar experiences going into this podcast, but we found that we do. I'm sure this is a story for so many women like us. You've created this special platform. Why do you feel that it's important for women to have a platform where their voices are shining in the sports field?
Well, my petty answer to start off would just be because it really makes some men mad, which shows you exactly why it's necessary.
I love that, by the way.
So I'll give an example from baseball again. So Wednesday night on ESPN, it was the first time that there were a fully female booth on ESPN. And it happens to be one of my really good friends, Melanie Newman, who is the play-by-play for the Orioles, and Jess Mendoza, who is a former gold medal Olympian in softball and has been doing ESPN commentary for years. I know them both. They're incredible. They're hardworking. They also get so much hate literally for just being women in the booth because men want to hear Vin Scully or, you know, Harry Carey. They don't want to hear women because it makes them uncomfortable. Not all men, obviously, but a lot of men, based on what I see on Twitter, are like, I don't want to hear a woman in the booth. Women didn't play baseball, so they don't know what they're talking about. Meanwhile, tons of the most famous sports broadcasters and commentators never played a single game.
Yeah.
Tons of coaches never played, and they coach. The difference is that those are men. And so therefore, you don't see someone being like, well, so-and-so never played. And therefore, you know, what, like, it's whatever. So
yeah,
this whole thing was going on. And I'm listening to this game, and it's Dodgers Padres. So it's not even like bad teams. It's a team in the wild card hunt, a team that was supposed to win 100 games, but kind of fell apart. It's a huge marquee game on ESPN. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm hearing two women talk about baseball. And growing up, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
You know, Susan Waldman is on the Yankees broadcast, but I didn't grow up listening to Yankees games. I grew up listening to Red Sox games, and the Red Sox broadcasters were all men. And that doesn't mean that they did something wrong, but no one ever thought to be like, maybe a woman has opinions on baseball, that she should be a color commentator. That representation matters.
Yeah.
And I hear this from young girls who reach out to me, and it's like the biggest honor when a girl's like, you make me want to be a sports writer. Because no one ever said to me, like, until I was 24 years old, nobody ever said to me, like, maybe you should think about going into sports. I wrote a paper my junior year of college on the history of the Red Sox for this history of Boston class that I was taking at Harvard. And I got an A+. And still, the professor was not like, maybe you should look into, like, sports journalism. No one suggests those things. It's like, if you want to do it, you need to find your own way, because it's not being, like, offered to you the same way it's being offered to guys. I've had to work so incredibly hard just to even get my foot in the door.
Yeah.
So my dad said to me, and this has always stuck with me, because my dad always believed in me. He's always supported me. But he gave me, like, kind of like the tough love of, like, I'm not going to, like, sugarcoat this for you. He said, you're going to have to work 160% as hard to seem as prepared as a man who is 60% prepared. And I have found that to be 100% true. If I get something wrong, I'm crucified for it. There are literally 8 million stats in baseball, more than any other sport. Baseball is a stats-based sport. And if I get anything wrong, it's not, oh, like, you made a mistake. It's, oh, see, she doesn't know what she's talking about because she's a woman.
Oh my God.
All the time. And the funny thing is that I can say the same thing as a man. Like, I can have the same opinion as a male Red Sox reporter. And I've seen this happen to me multiple times, where I will write something or I will have the same opinion on Twitter. And the only person who gets called out for having that opinion is me. And I'm not getting called out for the opinion being wrong. I'm getting called out for having an opinion as a woman. It's never, you're wrong. It's, you're wrong because you're a woman and women don't belong in sports. There's always that extra layer. Like, if a man has a bad opinion, guys will be like, yo, that's such a bad take, dude.
Yeah.
And if it's a woman, it's, see, this is why women shouldn't talk sports, because they don't know what they're talking about. And most of the time, like, I went to 2 Ivy League colleges.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly intelligent. I speak 3 languages. And I can read baseball reference stats. Like, it's not confusing to look it up. Like, people will be like, oh, how'd you know his batting average? It's literally free public information on a website. You, too, could know his batting average. Right. Like, and there's always just, like, there's always kind of a tone of disbelief or surprise or, like, kind of the backhanded compliment of, like, wow, you really know your stuff. which is like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I? I'm a full-time sports editor. Do you think I would get this job if I didn't know what I was talking about? Like,
yeah.
Like, no one ever says, like, wow, you really know your stuff to a guy in sports. It's, like, presumed that by working in sports, you know what you're doing because someone hired you. It's a very competitive industry.
Yeah. I think that's something that, not exactly the same, but a little bit similar, I've experienced in political science, where it's changing a little bit now, but the assumption is that I was in a Chinese public policy class one time, and my friends and I, the first day of the class, decided to count how often men spoke versus how often women spoke. And it was like 80% men, 20% women, because when a woman spoke, she would always make sure her thoughts were super calculated, super put together. She had a complete like thesis behind her comment in class. And a man would ask like what page they were on in the reading. Just anything that came to their mind that was in the chat that they could check would be a question that came into their mind. And they would just ask it. And that kind of confidence in not having to prove your intellect when you're in a class is something that I think in fields that have historically been dominated by men is really hard. And we talk about imposter syndrome a lot on this podcast. I think that's something that I've struggled with a lot, that a lot of women have struggled with a lot. But it seems like you come at this with so much confidence because you know that you know your stuff. And so I think that's a really empowering model to hear and to see.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's kind of this also very fine line, kind of eggshell situation for a lot of women in sports where, you know, you feel a lot of weight also of just the women that came before you and the women that that you hope will follow you in this industry of like, if I do something wrong, and I know from hearing, you know, from my friend Melanie about this, you know, doing broadcast play-by-play, if you're the first at something or you're one of the first, and I'm not saying that I'm the first, but, you know, she made history doing various games for various teams and broadcasts. She's made history doing them as the first for a bunch of different things. Mm-hmm. And when you're the first or one of the first at something, or you're just part of the beginning of the changing of status quo in an industry, you feel this huge pressure because if you make a mistake, it just gives the people who didn't want you and other women there in the first place reason next time to be like, no, because remember what happened with that woman. So we're just going to go with a man. You have to be so careful. And it's hard. And it also leads to a lot of women in the industry being super, super protective and kind of cagey, because there are fewer opportunities for women. And so if you manage to get one, I've unfortunately had run-ins with women who are like worried. I'm like, I don't want your job. I literally don't want to do what you do. I just want to be friends with you because there are so few of us in here. And then we can bring more friends and we can unite and take down the sexists. Like, but a lot of women sadly just don't, they're just not seeing it that way. And I totally understand why, because it's so hard just to even get your foot in the door here, that staying in the room like is so difficult, you know? And when you're in the room, like, and it's literally happened to me in real life before, most of the time, you're one of, if not the only women in there. Like, you know, when I would go to the Fenway press box, there would be like maybe 2 other women in a room of like 40 men. Most of them are like old white dudes. And they look at you like, what's she doing here? And you feel out of place. And then all of the things that you're thinking in your head of like, I don't belong here. I'm not good enough. They're like, see, we told you, because now the outside is giving you the same information. And it's hard. And it's one of the reasons that I actually don't like sitting in the Fenway press box. And I usually don't apply to be credentialed for games because I'd rather sit in the stands and just be a normal person. I can do the same amount of tweeting. My phone still connects to the press box Wi-Fi down with the normal people. And I don't have to feel like I'm being judged or ogled or questioned. The creepiest feeling in the world is when you are dressed professionally for work and you walk into a press box and you get guys giving you like creepy looks. Yeah. Because all of a sudden you feel like you're doing something wrong. And you know you're not,
feel like you're the one doing something wrong when they
and it's like you're the one being unprofessional in the workplace of like virtually like undressing me with your eyes in a press box. Like, That's wrong. And yet I feel like I need to go home and bathe in acid because of your male gaze. So it's hard sometimes.
And I think that's a big piece of why the platform that you've created is so important, because it's a place kind of free from that. It's a place free from the gaze and the guilt and the implications that come with being the only woman in the room, and you're in instead an empowering environment of plenty of other women experiencing similar things to you.
It's definitely a place where the girls that write with me, I say girls, they're women, but it's because we're girl at the game. So girls. Every woman I know in sports has a story of being harassed or made to feel uncomfortable or made to feel unwelcome or being talked down to. I literally had a guy explain to me the other day that that ERAs, which is earned run average for pitchers, he goes, ERA is an average. And I looked at my computer and I was like, oh my God. I'm so done. Like, I'm not even
a sports journalist, I'm done and I know that.
That's it. Like, the number of times that someone will explain something to me and my bio literally says that I'm a full-time sports editor, and it's like, do you think I would have my job if I did not know that earned run average was an average? The word is right there.
Like, in the name of Oh my God.
Yeah, and those are just like the mansplaining. It's not even like the fact that I had to turn off my DMs on Twitter because guys would send me unsolicited naked photos.
Oh my God.
Like total strangers. Or a group chat of male Yankees fans who kept making group DMs and adding me to them saying horribly disgusting things because you can't report DMs the way you can report public tweets. And every time I would leave the chat, they would just make a new chat and send me more horrible things, being like, if we ever see you at Yankee Stadium, we're going to bash your head in. We hope your male family members sexually assault you. Like,
oh my God.
All of these horrible things. There's nothing I could do about it because they just kept adding me and I would block them, but like it just kept coming. So eventually I turned my DMs off. So now people cannot reach me on DMs because I literally had to turn them off. So it's very fun.
And I think that experience, something that unfortunately happens in a lot of industries. And so that's really kind of why we made this podcast, because I'm sure people listening to this, I mean, me listening to this, I have plenty of stories just like yours, and I'm not in the sports industry. And I'm sure that anyone listening to this probably can unfortunately say the same. So that really brings us to why we made this podcast and to our last question of the show today, which is, what do we do with this? So what do the women listening to this need to know about navigating the world as a woman, as a Jewish woman, as someone who is breaking that glass ceiling of changing the way that we view the industries that we're in, about how to do it in the face of all of this negativity, still showing strength, still setting an example, still being one of the first, and doing it with a lot of confidence?
Oh, God. So I think one of the biggest things, and this is something that my friend Jess does, and it's kind of funny because it ties into Judaism really well. You know how like when someone comes to you and they say that they want to convert to Judaism, you're supposed to turn them away a couple times to see if they really, are serious. So kind of something she told me was like, when young women go to her being like, I want to work in sports like you, she'll kind of try to deter them first. And it's not a competitive thing. It's literally because she's going to tell them all of the things that are going to be hard for them to see if they think that they can handle it. And I honestly, it makes me think of Judaism every single time.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Because you have to have a really thick skin in this industry. And I did not have that. I'm by nature a very sensitive person. But what I learned, especially over the last year or so, because I think during the pandemic, people are extra angry, extra frustrated. They really want to just fight and argue. It's brought out a lot of the worst in people. What I learned is that most of the time, almost entirely, what people say to you, about you, what people do to you is more of a reflection on them than it is on you. If somebody is super angry at you, and Julia, I know you know this from just being online all the time, like a lot of times people come at you with so much anger and hatred and vitriol, and they have no idea who you are. So there's literally no, unless you've said the most horrible, vile thing, which you and I don't do that kind of stuff online, there is no actual reason that they would have merit to treat you that way. But they do it. Why? Because they're an angry person. And so that's probably the biggest advice. Like when a young woman comes to me and asks me, I spoke to a college class, a sports class, management class in Florida virtually last year. And I just said, you know, it's going to be really hard if you want to be a woman in sports. It is. I'm not going to like lie to you. Be like, it's all sunshine and rainbows. And, you know, you're going to be an executive at the Boston Red Sox in 2 years and you're going to make 8 figures and live in Beacon Hill. It's not going to happen. But most of the time, like when someone treats you badly, it's because there's something inside of them that is hurting or that is wrong. And once you learn that, it's a lot easier to kind of move on from these things instead of wondering like why this is happening to you, why someone would talk to you this way, like being like, I'm a good person. Why are people mean to me? Because they're mean people. Because somebody hurt them and they want to feel better. So they're going to go try and take it out on somebody else because they can't kind of, there's this thing on How I Met Your Mother, which is a very outdated show and I don't actually like it, but there was this episode called The Chain of Screaming, I think. And basically it talks about how when someone like yells at you or gets mad at you, especially like at work, for example, like if your boss yells at you, you can't yell back at your boss, but now you have all this anger and like frustration built up inside you. And you're kind of just like, I have nowhere to put this. So what you do instead is you go and yell at somebody else. You yell at somebody that you can yell at. So like if your boss is mad at you, then you go and yell at, you know, a friend or a parent or a spouse. You go and take your anger out on somebody who can not punish you. I'm not explaining this well, but basically being like people who are hurt will go on to hurt other people. So like the Wi-Fi literally went out again, of course. It just, I don't know what's wrong with it. It'll literally be full. You know, all the pie in my MacBook will be full for the entire time. And then all of a sudden it's just dead. So I apologize. Well, I'll rephrase it. But basically, I think the premise of the episode, and I haven't watched this in a long time, but basically what happens is Marshall's boss yells at him. And obviously he can't yell at his boss, but now he's all mad and he's angry. So he goes home and he gets in a fight with his wife, I think it is. And then she goes and she yells at somebody else, basically being like, people who are hurt will go on to hurt other people. But if you realize that most of the time it's not about you, you break that chain. You know, so if somebody's like really nasty to me online, I'm not going to go be mean to my boyfriend about it because A, he didn't do anything wrong, and B, I didn't either. The only person who did something wrong is the person who's saying horrible things to me. And that's definitely just that, and also just like be as offline as possible. Like your internet life is not your real life, and like disconnecting and unplugging, like the Red Sox are probably not going to make the postseason this year, and I'm honestly glad because at this point I've kind of had enough. And during the winter, I can be so much more offline because I don't have to be talking about 162 baseball games. It's truly a blessing. By this time of the year, I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. It doesn't help that the Chagim usually fall during an important part of the baseball season. Just very stressful. Like the amount of times that I have been at Fenway Park on like Erev Rosh Hashanah and then had to go to Rosh Hashanah afterwards is like, it's 2 years ago, the last day of the season was Erev Rosh Hashanah. So I was at a Red Sox game and they weren't going to the postseason. Like they were already mathematically eliminated. They weren't going to play, but you never want to end the season on a bad note, losing the game, especially because they were playing the Orioles. The Orioles are bad. And they took the game into extra innings. And my sister and I are sitting there. And my mom's texting us being like, someone needs to come home and set the table. Somebody needs to help me make matzo balls, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, but I'm literally not leaving. Like this could be Mookie Betts' last game as a Red Sox, like all this stuff, which it was. Finally, they walked it off. They won in extra innings, or they won, they made it really close and they won. And then we ran home. But, the point being, like, I'm ready for a break.
We could do an entire second podcast about being a Jewish sports journalist and how that has to do with when games are played and everything. But that would probably take us into like a 5-hour podcast, which we won't get into today, but maybe we'll have you back on in the future.
I would love that.
Yes. I think that's something that we've had women on the show from tons of different fields, but that experience of you're not doing anything wrong, they're just a mean person, I think is the biggest lesson I've had to learn in my life in the past few years. And I think that's something that I wish I would have learned sooner, not internalizing the bigotry, the just anger that a lot of people have, especially toward women, because they see us as the natural person to displace that on. And that's outdated. It was never okay, but it's 2021 and we're not letting that happen anymore. So having that really strong backbone, I think, is so important. And I really appreciate having you on the show today as much as you shared with us. And I feel like you set this incredible example of strength. And I'm grateful to have heard your story. And I'm sure that everyone listening can echo the same sentiment.
You are too kind. Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge treat to like actually be on another woman's podcast.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time which is not to say I'm not super flattered whenever anyone asks me to be on a podcast, but most of the time I'm the woman in the room, the virtual room. Last night I was on a wonderful podcast and it was me and 3 guys, which is great. We had a great time, but it's always nice when it's like another woman because there's just kind of like that commiserating and understanding that you can't get when you're in a room full of dudes.
Yes, 100%. So that's why we do this. And so I'm really glad that you joined us today. It's an honor to speak with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
So I'm a little bit obsessed with Gabrielle's story. The daughter of a rabbi who grew up on baseball games and Friday night dinners, growing up to create this platform which gave her the access she was lacking in her own life. I think about my own family. My great-grandfather, the kosher butcher with a love for the Brooklyn Dodgers. My grandfather, my father, the biggest fans of the Kansas City Royals you'll ever meet. My mother, the child of 2 Israeli immigrant parents, a Yankees fan with a soft spot for Derek Jeter. Baseball is so deeply woven into the American Jewish story. And I suppose it shouldn't come as a surprise that Jewish immigrants, often escaping horrors in Europe, would turn to America's favorite pastime. But it struck me especially listening to Gabrielle's story. She was tired of not being taken seriously in spite of her passion. So she built something to make the world just a bit more accessible. And baseball is no small thing. It's the heart of so much Jewish American culture. I mean, come on. How many of us grew up hearing about the legend of Sandy Koufax when we complained to our parents about fasting on Yom Kippur? Now that I am feeling especially sentimental, I suppose that this, my friends, is where we'll leave you for today's episode of Nice Jewish Girls. Hopefully a bit smarter and a bit more inspired. Your feedback is crucial to making this show the best it can be. So contact us at podcasts@jewishimpact.com. And don't forget to join us next week when we'll be speaking with editor at The Forward, Laura Adkins. Nice Jewish Girls is a production of Unpacked, a division of Open Door Media. Rivki Stern is our producer, and I am your host, Julia Jassy. Check out jewishimpact.com for everything Unpacked related, and subscribe to our other podcasts. And don't forget to follow Unpacked at all of the social media places. Just look for @JewishUnpacked. Talk to you later, ladies.